Coming out of Holy Week, Catholicism continues to dominate the news cycle, with a ceasefire in Iran being reached, as well as the daring rescue of a U.S. crew member in Iran that closely mirrors the first story of Easter, showing that there truly are no kings but Christ. My name is Ben Corriveau, and welcome to my show. So obviously, first story that we're going to start off with today is the rescue of our American crew member. They were shot down on Good Friday, which obviously, if you understand the symbol, what Easter is actually about, Christ was crucified on Good Friday, that he died for all our sins. And the last words of this pilot, as he was being ejected from his fighter jet, were "God is good." So right there, it's quite symbolic. He's giving himself up to God's will, just like Jesus Christ did. Because Christ obviously is the Son of God, so he could have, if he wanted to, gone against all the people and resisted them, but instead he chose to go like a lamb to the slaughter and die for our sins. So that's already quite interesting there, that he was shot down on Good Friday and his last words were "God is good." But it also turns out that he was rescued on Easter Sunday, which is quite interesting because that's the day that Christ was resurrected from the dead. And this happened, he was on a mountain that was 7,000 feet high, reportedly. And this was a 7-hour operation, both of which obviously have the number 7, which is a huge number in the Bible. It symbolizes completion and perfection, which was reported this operation was fairly perfect. It went by seamlessly. There was no serious injuries to the crew member that was actually stuck in Iran, even though he was being hunted by the Iranians. They actually issued a bounty out for him, and he survived that, luckily. And it's just funny to me that all this stuff, like I said, it very closely mirrors what actually happened, or the story of Easter, where Christ was crucified on Good Friday and rose from the dead on Easter Sunday. And this man, he was essentially dead, quote unquote, on Good Friday, where we had no idea whether or not we were ever going to get him back. It was very likely that he was going to die in Iran because like I said, they had a bounty out on him. The whole country was looking for him. And yet he was recovered on Easter Sunday with a 7-hour operation. So to all the people who say that Catholicism or Christianity doesn't necessarily, it isn't true, it's kind of hard to see stuff like this, where this is, I'm not going to say it's a miracle, but it's extremely unlikely that everything would line up in this way. So take that as you will. Obviously, I'm taking it as a sign from God, but like I said, take it as you will. But while this was happening, Trump had some controversial posts that he put up. The first one being on Easter Sunday, and this, I found it to be quite funny. It was kind of joking. It just really Trump. It's just Trump being Trump. So that's why I took it more as a joke than anything. I guess like part of the ultimatum that we knew was going on. Trump had given the Iranians a deadline to reach a ceasefire deal, and that's pretty much what the context of this is. So let's read it now, and just so you know, if you have any kids around, this does have some explicit language. I'm gonna do my best to not say some of it, the more extreme language, but so this is the post. So from Donald J. Trump: Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one, in Iran. There will be nothing like it. Open the effing straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah, President Donald J. Trump. So obviously, this sparked a lot of controversy for several reasons. First of which was that he didn't put anything else up for Easter on Easter Sunday. As far as I'm aware, I didn't see anything. This was pretty much the one post that he put up on Easter. So that was already kind of strenuous. Then obviously the language, not too many people were happy about that. And I can understand that. Personally, for me, I voted for Trump because I wanted somebody who got stuff done. I support his policies. I don't particularly care about this stuff. It would be nice if he didn't use this language and was actually focused more on not giving the media red meat like this, just to criticize him. But obviously, like I said, I don't particularly care that he used the language here. The other criticism that he received from this was obviously the praise be to Allah part. It's obviously more joking. Is trying to use the Iranians' language because obviously they aren't listening to what we would typically say, where we're trying to be diplomatic about it and say, oh, well, we'll negotiate and we'll come to a conclusion, or we'll reach an agreement and then we'll both be happy. They only really understand use of force over there. That's why they're so strict, and that's why they have allegedly slaughtered tens of thousands of civilians. I think it's pretty clear that they have, but technically there's no confirmation of that. So do your own research. If you don't believe that, then okay, that's nothing I can do to convince you one way or the other. You need to do your own research. But to me, it's pretty clear that they only know the language of force and power. So that's kind of why this happened. And then, obviously, the day of this deadline, so Tuesday, Trump put up another post, which was obviously another controversial post because nothing that Trump posts can ever not be controversial. Like I said, I elected him for policy. I voted for him for policy purposes. I don't particularly care about the controversies over what he says. I wish he wouldn't say the things he does a lot of the times. Like the Rob Reiner stuff that he said was absolutely atrocious. Same thing with the Robert Mueller. Just because you don't like somebody doesn't mean that you should be saying that they were evil and they deserve to die or anything like that. Nobody deserves to die. I know we all do, but nobody deserves to die. It's always sad when somebody dies because it's a human life. I have said this before. I'll say it again. I disagree with all that stuff. But like I said, I didn't hire him for the way he talks. I hired him for his policies, or I voted for him for his policies. So this one was, a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change, where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight. One of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran. So, obviously, this drew a lot of controversy because he was saying that he was going to wipe out a civilization, which, like I said before, the whole idea behind these messages, in my mind, was to try to get the Iranians to actually comply with it. And it seems to have worked because we have a ceasefire. And this ceasefire happened, I believe it was within it was certainly within hours. I believe it was within about half an hour of the deadline. And they decided there was going to be a ceasefire. Obviously, there were a bunch of people saying that Trump chickened out. I don't know how you can say that he chickened out. I mean, yes, it would have been bad if he nuked them into oblivion and literally wiped out their civilization, which these people were they were criticizing him for posting this and everything. But then when he didn't and we had the ceasefire, they decided to attack him because we had a ceasefire, which just goes to show that these people aren't serious. Like I put up in a post, these people don't have principles. And once you recognize that, it's pretty easy to see where they're going to go, like what positions they're going to take. Because they'll say one thing one day, and then the next day, if Trump supports it, then all of a sudden they have to be against it. They're just anti-Trump. They don't have any actual positions aside from being anti-Trump, which is quite sad because obviously if you are just against something, you're not for anything, and therefore you cannot necessarily have good policies. because even if the other person has bad policies, just because you're against those bad policies doesn't necessarily mean that you are for good policies. So all this to say, nobody who actually knows what they're talking about is upset about the ceasefire. Obviously, like I said, there was the people saying that Trump chickened out. It's the tacos. Trump always chickens out, which, like I said, is ridiculous. But we also had stories coming out about a 10-point peace deal, which nearly all of the 10 points that were released, there were a few different ones that came out. I saw, I believe it was the Washington Post. I don't remember if it was Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. They had one out. New York Times had another one out. There were a few different organizations that had them out. And so nobody really knew what it was, so I didn't want to publish anything about which of the 10-point plans was actually accurate. And because of all the variants and universally, each of these 10-point plans had a majority of points favoring the Iranians, with certain points being that we would allow them to enrich uranium, which was obviously just that one point in particular kind of goes to show that it wasn't serious at all that these were the real points, because Trump has repeatedly said they cannot get a nuclear weapon and they cannot enrich uranium, because the only reason to enrich uranium beyond, I believe it's 60%, is to generate nuclear weapons. So, I mean, that was already a non-starter in the first place. But they also had a bunch of other crazy requirements in there, including that we were going to remove all sanctions on Iran and allies, which I don't have a problem with removing sanctions on Iran if we're reaching a peace deal. That's fine. But their allies, that's certainly questionable to me, because their allies are enemies to the U.S. right now. If you're talking about Russia and China, that's not necessarily a good policy to have, that we remove our sanctions on them. And then another one was that we cannot go to war with any of them or their allies, which that's fine for the short, like I would much prefer that we don't go to war with anybody ever, but that's not a realistic position. Sometimes you have to go to war, as I'll get into later, but it's just unreasonable to say that you will never attack somebody else, because then you break that rule, like a century in the future, and suddenly you're the bad. Like, it's just ridiculous on its face that that's the case. But there were a few other points that were just absolutely ridiculous, but people actually believe this. And luckily, I wanted to pull up the Independent for this, because even though I like them, they're a fairly moderate source from what I've seen, moderate to slightly left-wing. And they said, the U.S. has not published the 10-point plan it claims to have seen. Trump has also told the AFP news agency that there was a 15-point transaction, of which most of those things have been agreed on. Trump also told Sky News, "You don't know what the points are, I know what the points are, and many of them are very good points. I can't talk about it, but all of them are good points." Sky suggested it was unclear from their call whether Trump was referring to the same 10 points as Iran, because obviously these 10 points that were released came from Iran, which is another indication that they were false. It was the Iranians just trying to influence us. And we actually just got confirmation of this, that they were misinformation. It was an Iranian misinformation operation. I'll play the clip from Fox News now.
The Iranians are trying to put out disinformation already. And yesterday we reported on a 10-point plan, and I'm told by a U.S. official that that was actually an old plan that the Iranians put out because they wanted people to talk about it and try to put their perspective forward. And so we are correcting that today, and we spoke with U.S. officials yesterday who said that is not the latest plan. There is an updated plan that the president agreed to, and despite these efforts by the Iranian regime to try to spin negotiators, this will be incredibly consequential this weekend to see whether or not they are serious about creating a good faith deal.
Yeah, so it's pretty clear that these 10 points were false, which, like I said, any rational person who's been paying attention to this conflict could have told you that from the beginning. I mean, the idea that Iranians would get a whole bunch of wins while we would get very few wins relatively to how successful this operation has been overall just goes to show that people are willing to believe anything if it's anti-Trump, it's just ridiculous. Like I said, these people aren't serious. They don't have any positions. They're just against Trump and the U.S. Like, if you want, that's fine if you want to believe that, but don't expect me to respect you for your opinions, because that's not a serious opinion whatsoever. just like being completely against the Democrats and not being able to articulate why that's not a good reason. This lack of evidence is not evidence of something. So that was obviously big news this week. And then another big thing that was personally aggravating me a lot on both sides of this issue was the Vatican feud with Donald Trump. Because to me, it just seems like both sides of this are acting like children, and it's just ridiculous. So first, we had the story that there was a meeting between a Pentagon officials and Vatican ambassador, in which the Pentagon officials threatened them, essentially saying that they had to choose between following Christ and following MAGA, which is absolutely absurd. And that is, people should be rightfully upset about that if that were true. But, and one thing I do want to specify is that I saw a lot of prominent figures that I genuinely respect. Like Sean Ryan put it up, and I highly respect him. I don't understand. I don't recognize why he didn't do his due diligence, because this was found to be false quite soon after. I mean, it did take me a few hours to find that it was false, but I mean, just reading it in the first place kind of implied that it was false, because they didn't even show the information that they had supposedly that proved that this was the case. So it was just allegations that were there was no evidence to support them in the first place, which that doesn't, like I said, that doesn't mean that it's false, but it also doesn't make it true, which is important to recognize. But we have this from the Hill that so this is also another lesson in misleading left-wing sources, because the title of this is Pentagon Denies Threatening Vatican During January Meeting with Holy See's Diplomat, which that implies that it's just the Pentagon that is denying that they threatened them, which is not actually true. It was the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See, Brian Birch, said he spoke with the Cardinal on Thursday, and that Pierre confirmed that recent reports of the meeting with Colby are fabrications that were just invented. So it's not just the Pentagon saying it. It's the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican that is saying this. Like, it's just absurd on its face, and people still believe that this is actually what happened. And like I said, it's absurd on its face. There was no evidence to support it in the first place, but people believed it because they are anti-Trump. But I don't want to give MAGA a pass on this either, because when this released, there were a lot of MAGA personalities that were saying that it was the Vatican's fault for this, that they were condemning the Catholic Church for this, which is absolutely absurd. Like I said, this report was absurd on its face. So regardless of which position you're on, if you actually looked into it, it was fairly easy to disprove. But the fact that MAGA individuals went along with it and then just blamed them because they blindly support Trump, which I'm against. I think that if you support Trump, you should understand his positions, his policies, and you shouldn't mindlessly follow that, because otherwise you're no different from the leftists that are just anti-Trump. But that was huge news. Like I said, it was very aggravating to me seeing both sides of this. Both the reports that the Trump administration had done this to the Catholic Church, which, like I said, was easily disproven, and MAGA attacking the Catholic Church for this. But this isn't the only step of what actually happened here, because the Pope himself he's been issuing a bunch of blanket statements that don't specify Trump, but are quite clearly directed at Trump. And to me, this is childish, just like MAGA individuals going out and attacking the Catholic Church anytime that something seems to be against MAGA. They attack the Catholic Church. Like, you're just throwing a temper tantrum because you didn't get your way. That's fine. Like, because the Catholic Church doesn't fall neatly into the left-right spectrum that we have in current politics, in modern politics. It just doesn't. No matter how you want to put it, it doesn't. And there are problems with both sides. To me, it's kind of clear that the conservative side tends to be more in alignment with Catholic values, as they don't support radical gender ideology, which goes against church teachings. They don't support any of the abortion policies that the Catholic Church has been against for centuries. And the left has also deliberately attacked Christianity and Catholic churches, whether that be through lawfare or through investigations that had no basis. So, to me, like I said, it's pretty clear the problems with the conservative side, because I'll explain those as well, just so you can understand that I do actually see this on both sides, is that one is obviously the immigration issue, which this is where some nuance comes into it, because some Catholics believe that deportation as a whole is wrong and that there shouldn't be borders. I obviously don't fall on that side, because I subscribe to some of St. Thomas Aquinas's theories on the church, which he was one of the founding church fathers. So I don't understand why more people don't subscribe to them, but that's my position on it. So through that, it's the Ordo Caritatis, which essentially dictates the order of charity, which it shows that there is actually a specific order in which charity ought to be given to people, which it doesn't mean that you treat anybody badly. It just means that there's a certain priority which you should do. Obviously, like, you should put God first. That's traditional Catholic teaching. And you can't necessarily have that if you don't have an Ordo Caritatis, at least not logically. But so from my perspective, the problem is that the illegal immigrants didn't follow our laws, which are justly implemented. We have policies to implement these. And so that's that they're not following our laws. And then not only that, but they're also causing a lot of crime in our cities. And it's hurting Americans, which the Ordo Caritatis dictates that the closer something is to you, the more you ought to care about it. And like I said, that doesn't mean that you don't care about something going on across the world, across the country. It's just you prioritize what's closest to you because you have more impact on those things closer to you. So there's that. There's also the support for IVF, which obviously I'm against. It just because it produces good things in the end doesn't necessarily mean that it is actually a inherently moral process. So I'm against it. The Catholic Church is against it, but it's seemingly more popular on the conservative side right now. I know Trump has signed a few orders on it. So there are definitely valid criticisms of MAGA and Trump and the Trump administration by the Catholic Church. But at the same time, the Catholic Church has gone a bit overboard with their responses because, like I said, I feel like they're acting very childish. We have right here from Vatican News. This was the Easter Sunday gospel that the Pope gave, where he was talking about Jesus does not listen to prayers of those who wage war. It's a great sermon. Obviously, he was talking about, like I said earlier, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, where he could have gone and destroyed all the people. He could have fought back, but he didn't. He went like a lamb to the slaughter, knowing that he was going to die for our sins, which that's great. But this kind of ignores certain parts of the Bible, which I don't think we should be picking and choosing parts of the Bible. We should be taking it as a whole, looking at the context of it, and using it that way, because a lot of people on both sides will just pick and choose what they want to believe, and that's what they believe. They don't actually believe everything that is in place. And that's one of the reasons why I'm largely not a Protestant. There's a few other reasons, but I just feel like Protestantism is a lot of people picking and choosing what they like and not taking the things that they don't like about it, which obviously I have a problem with. But like I was saying, this leaves out certain stories from the Bible, such as Exodus 14, verses 25 through 30, where there was the war with Pharaoh. Obviously, this was when Moses was leading the Israelites out of Egypt. They left, he parted the Red Sea, and then Pharaoh chased him, and he ended up closing the Red Sea, killing most of the Pharaoh's army. So that was obviously God stepping in there. He was listening to the prayers of the Israelites there. Then we also had the war with the Canaanites, Judge 1, verses 1 through 20. This was a war with the Canaanites where now, to be fair, they didn't slaughter all of them. They left the king alive, I believe. But this was another war that was blessed by God and where they listened to the prayers of the Israelites. Then we also had the war with the Amalekites, which is in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 1 through 9. Like, there's definitely instances in which God has actually listened to the prayers of those waging war, because there's this concept of a just war. And this is actually outlined in paragraph 2309 of the Catholic Catechism, or Catechism. So, as dictated in the Catholic Catechism, paragraph 2309, the strict conditions for legitimate defense by military force. So, I do want to be clear, this does specify defense. So, offensive actions aren't necessarily covered. Personally, I believe that in certain instances, for example, a preemptive, like if you know somebody's going to attack you and destroy you, it doesn't make sense to wait for them to attack. So I would consider that a preemptive defense. But in general, this applies strictly to defense. But the strict conditions for legitimate defense by military force require rigorous consideration. The gravity of such a decision makes it subject to rigorous conditions of moral legitimacy. At one and the same time, the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and concerned. 2. All other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. 3. There must be serious prospects of success. 4. The use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. The power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. And so those are the 4 rules for just war, which I would argue that I'm not going to argue that it could be applied, or I'm not going to argue that it is being applied to the Iranian conflict right now, but it could reasonably be applied to the conflict in Iran right now, because obviously, there's, like I was talking about earlier, there are reports that they've slaughtered tens of thousands of innocent protesters in their streets, and this regime has been doing this for decades. Not only that, but also sponsoring terrorism across several proxies in the region. So they've been doing that. They're definitely causing a lot of harm to not only the region, but the world as a whole. So there's that. It's been shown that we've been trying to handle this by sanctioning them. We've tried appeasement. We've done a ton of different foreign policy options with them to eliminate this behavior, and nothing's worked right now. So that point could reasonably be met. Must be serious prospects of success. This one I do think is something that should be heavily considered, because there's not really guarantees one way or the other of success, and we did know this going in, that they were weaker than we had anticipated, but like I said, this is something that could very easily be argued one way or the other. And then finally, the use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. Obviously, this is why my position on this is that I'm fine with it, so long as we do not have boots on the ground. We do not use, obviously, weapons of mass destruction or anything like that, because doing that does actually produce evil and disorder that is greater than the evils being perpetrated by the regime there. And like I said, I'm fairly neutral on the whole conflict. I'm waiting to see how it goes. I'll be more against it if obviously if we get boots on the ground, if we elevate our military action in the region, or escalate, I mean. But overall, I'm pretty neutral on it. I do want to say my timeline is looking pretty good right now, because this is week 6, and I said 4 to 8 weeks. So I'm hoping that the ceasefire lasts and that we have peace in the region, because that would be great. We wouldn't have to send any more people over there. No more Iranians would be dying, obviously, which is a great thing. Like I said earlier, every death is sad. It doesn't matter who it is or where they are. It's sad because it's a human death. But with all that being said, Pope also put out another statement. God does not bless any conflict. Anyone who is a disciple of Christ, the Prince of Peace, is never on the side of those who once wielded the sword and today drop bombs. Military action will not create space for freedom or times of peace, which comes only from the patient promotion of coexistence and dialogue among peoples. Again, this, and I do want to specify, papal infallibility is true. It goes, so it applies to Catholic doctrine and church doctrine. So in this instance, he is correct where the people following Christ are always on the side of peace. But that doesn't always mean that peace is the way to get things done. And I want to be careful how I speak here, because obviously everybody should strive for peace. But in certain instances, when other people are aggressing on you for decades, or not even just us, but the entire region as a whole, and slaughtering their civilians, allegedly, it is pretty clear that there isn't a peaceful way to continue to exist with those that are aggressing upon us. And that's why we have the principles of just war. So, like I said, he's 100% correct here. And this is like the way that I actually consider these things, because obviously I'm a Catholic. I follow the teachings of Christ. But so, like I said, though, these statements to me are just childish, because it's pretty clear he's directing these at Trump and the Trump administration, but he won't come out and say it. And another thing that I've seen is that he's reportedly meeting with David Axelrod, or he just recently met with him. I don't recall which of those is accurate, but I know it was with David Axelrod. And to me, he should be meeting with Trump. I mean, like, because all this stuff, these problems are caused by a lack of communication or a lack of understanding, people just attacking each other. I really wish that the Pope and Trump would sit down and actually discuss this, how Trump could actually be more closely following the teachings of the Catholic Church, because then we could actually improve our standing and make it even more in alignment with Christianity and Christian teaching, as opposed to just adopting whatever the most people want, because that's not actually the best thing every time. Because obviously the tyranny of the majority over the minority is a huge problem, and that's why we have the governmental system that we have right now. But obviously this criticism has been going on for much longer than just this conflict, as when Pope Leo was initially he was initially made Pope, it was revealed that he had a social media account, obviously, like most people do in the modern age, and he had a lot of criticism for Trump and JD Vance over immigration, which, like I said, this is fine. Rational minds can disagree on what the best course of action is for handling this immigration. Obviously, I've said my position, and I tend to agree with the Trump and Vance administration, but I do want to specify that all deportations must be done humanely, meaning that the individuals being deported, they can't be abused, they can't be mistreated while they're being deported. They need to be given the same human dignity and rights as any other human. They're just being relocated back to their home country because we cannot necessarily handle them here. But his criticism of Vance was actually over his understanding of the Ordo Amori, which is based on the Ordo Caritatis, which I talked about earlier. And I just find this particularly interesting because, like I said, if you have a position of leadership in the Catholic Church, I would expect you to understand at least the readings of the founding church members, or some of the biggest names there, such as like Thomas Aquinas, because he actually references this. This is specifically in his Summa Theologiae. This is question 26, where he actually goes through the logic behind why there actually is an order of charity, and why we should be more charitable to those closer to us than those further away, because logically we actually have more influence on those closer to us. So if we continue to give charity or act charitably towards those around us, those people may then act charitable towards those around them, and it will eventually spread, leading to a much further reach than you could get by just strictly focusing across the globe at a single moment. So I do think that's important to note. And like I said, I really think that when the Pope was making the statements, he either wasn't thinking about this, or maybe he was just wrapped up in emotion. I don't know. I can't speak for him. But this is definitely something that has been part of church tradition for a long time. It's not like it's something new. So there's that. But we also had, obviously, with Pope Francis, a lot of conservatives didn't like him. He's the Pope, so it doesn't matter if you like him or not. He's the Pope. He's the head of the Catholic Church. Like I said, it doesn't matter. You don't have a say in it. It's God's choice. That's it. If you don't like God's choice, then I guess you could argue with him, but I wouldn't recommend that, because he's always going to win in the end. So we had the Vatican letter to bishops regarding the mass deportations going on, which you can read here. I put it on the screen. So it's important to note that in this letter, this is from Pope Francis, so this was before he died and before Pope Leo obviously became Pope. So he says, I'm only going to read the paragraph 4. So this is, I have followed closely the major crisis that is taking place in the United States with the initiation of a program of mass deportations. The rightly formed conscience cannot fail to make a critical judgment and express its disagreement with any measure that tacitly or explicitly identifies the illegal status of some migrants with criminality. At the same time, one must recognize the right of a nation to defend itself and keep communities safe from those who have committed violent or serious crimes while in the country or prior to arrival. That said, the act of deporting people who, in many cases, have left their own land for reasons of extreme poverty, insecurity, exploitation, persecution, or serious deterioration of the environment damages the dignity of many men and women and of entire families, and places them in a state of particular vulnerability and defenselessness. So, and then you could read part 5. It's going to be on the screen. Paragraph 4 and 5 are the important ones here, where he actually does explicitly say that the state does have a right to defend its borders and dictate who has a right to be in the country. And he's also right that we need to ensure that people are not being unjustly treated, and that they aren't being unjustly deported to their countries, which to me, that's not really happening. What's happening is a lot of times these people, they either lied about something to get into the country, they claimed asylum while they didn't actually need asylum. They just claimed it because it got them into the country legally. And all these people, there isn't any reason why we shouldn't deport them. And like I said, reasonable minds can differ. If you want to be open borders and a Catholic, technically, I would argue that you could reasonably get that from what the Pope is saying. It could be a reasonable interpretation of it. I would disagree if, like I said, if you look into the Order Caritatis by St. Thomas Aquinas or other church teachings, you can basically land on either side. But to me, the more rational position is that of ensuring that deportations continue occurring. But this is kind of my problem with the handling of this by the Catholic Church, is that they're extremely vocal about stuff like deporting the mass deportations that the Trump administration is actually enacting, as well as the military action, which I can understand the military action more, but the deportations I feel like they're going a bit overboard on. But my problem, like I said, is that they're making these huge, grandiose statements anytime that something that a conservative does, they deem to be incorrect. But they don't do the same when it comes to the left positions, which I already went through. A lot of them are blatantly anti-Catholic and anti-Christian, but they just kind of sit and ignore them. For example, there literally wasn't any statement by the Vatican or the Catholic Church when it was revealed in 2025. So this was, I believe that this was borderline when Pope Leo was installed. So this was it was came out that the Biden administration made false, they painted Catholics as violent extremists and used this as a basis to spy on them. This came out in a House Judiciary report. No statement from the Catholic Church on that, which was clearly an overreach on the left side, where they were explicitly targeting Christians, and Catholics in particular. There was no statement made about that. Then we also have this right here from LifeSite. The Biden administration sought to use, they prosecuted nuns, Catholic nuns, that were leading medical facilities that would not perform transgender surgeries. Again, this is against Catholic teaching, and yet there was no public condemnation of this. And I understand, because I was talking with somebody I know actually earlier today about this, where yes, the Catholic Church does actually speak up and say that they are against the positions of the left, but they don't issue these grandiose statements. Somebody asks them and they'll say, "Oh yeah, we're against that." Then that's it. They make like a small statement or maybe a little joke about it, but they don't come out publicly and make a huge statement about it to condemn it. Which, like I said, I would actually encourage them to do that, because I want both sides to be held accountable. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, I don't care. You should be held accountable by the Catholic Church, which is ridiculous to say that they're favoring one side over the other, especially when that side tends to be more anti-Catholic and anti-Christian than the side that you're blatantly against. Which, like I said, there are problems that the conservatives have, and they should rightly be criticized for them. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't criticize the other side. Because not only that, but we also had Pope Francis being extremely wishy-washy on the abortion issue. And what I mean by this is he was actually given an interview right after his meeting with President Biden, and he was asked whether or not he would condemn Biden, because Biden claims to be a Catholic, but he supports abortion, which is blatantly against the Catholic Church. It has been for centuries, basically since the beginning of the church. Yet he said that that he leaves the decision to support abortion up to Biden's conscience. And this is a quote: "Let Biden talk to his pastor about that incoherence," because it is incoherent that you can support something that is against church teaching and still be for that church teaching. But like I said, this is ridiculous. I understand. I think I understand where he's coming from. I think he wanted to act charitably and show that he's willing to act charitably towards those that are blatantly in violation of Catholic teaching, because they don't want to exclude them. But at the same time, I feel like this statement gives credence to those ideologies that are blatantly against the Catholic Church and have been for centuries. Like, there's absolutely no reason why somebody should get a pass for supporting abortion while claiming to be Catholic, because it's incoherent, like the Pope said. So obviously we had all that. Like I said, I'm aggravated by both sides. I really want Trump and the Pope to sit down and actually discuss these things. If it were public, that's fine. I think it would be better to be a private meeting, just so that way they can talk about things without having to worry about the public ramifications of it. But it's just ridiculous that MAGA is attacking the Catholic Church for literally nothing that the Catholic Church has done aside from attempt to uphold the teachings of Christ, while at the same time the Catholic Church is largely targeting conservatives and saying little to nothing about the Democrats or the leftists that are blatantly going against church teachings. So all that going on. Now, speaking of fighting, Trump decided that he was going to go after some prominent podcasters. So I'm going to read the whole post just so you can see this. And just to preface this, I understand why he did it. I am highly questionable as to whether or not he should have done this, just because my whole thing is that I'm trying to unify people. Obviously, I'm a conservative. Like I said, I have a lot of leftist friends. I deal with a lot of moderates in my life. And I want to unite people. I don't want all the division that's going on in society right now. I know that that's unpopular. I don't get paid to do this or anything like that. Nobody pays me. I'm not giving talking points for free. I'm literally giving you my opinions and telling you the news that's going on. But this is what Trump said. I know why Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, and Alex Jones have all been fighting me for years, especially by the fact that they think it is wonderful for Iran, the number one state sponsor of terror, to have a nuclear weapon. Because they have one thing in common: low IQs. They're stupid people. They know it. Their families know it. And everyone else knows it too. Look at their past. Look at their record. They don't have what it takes, and they never did. They've all been thrown off television, lost their shows, and aren't even invited on TV because nobody cares about them. They're nut jobs, troublemakers, and will say anything necessary for some free and cheap publicity. Now they think that they get some clicks because they have third-rate podcasts, but nobody's talking about them, and their views are the opposite of MAGA. Or, I wouldn't have won the presidential election in a landslide. MAGA agrees with me and just gave CNN a 100% approval rating of Trump. Not hand-flailing fools like Tucker Carlson, who couldn't even finish college. He was a broken man when he got fired from Fox, and he's never been the same. Perhaps he should see a good psychiatrist. Or Megyn Kelly, who nastily asked me the now famous "Only Rosie O'Donnell" question. Or crazy Candace Owens, who accuses the highly respected First Lady of France of being a man, when she is not, and will hopefully win lots of money in the ongoing lawsuit. Actually, to me, the First Lady of France is a far more beautiful woman than Candace. In fact, it's not even close. Or bankrupt Alex Jones, who says some of the dumbest things, and lost his entire fortune, as he should have, for his horrendous attack on the families of the Sandy Hook shooting victims, ridiculously claiming it was a hoax. These so-called pundits are losers, and they always will be. Now fake news CNN, the failing New York Times, and all of the other radical left news organizations are hailing them and giving them positive press for the first time in their lives. They're not MAGA. They're losers, just trying to latch on to MAGA. As president, I could get them on my side anytime I want to, but when they call, I don't return their calls because I'm too busy on world and country affairs, and after a few times they go nasty, just like Marjorie Trader Brown, but I no longer care about that stuff. I only care about doing right for our country. MAGA is about winning, and strength is not allowing Iran to have nuclear weapons. MAGA is about making America great again, and these people have no idea how to do that, but I do, because the United States is now the hottest country anywhere in the world. President Donald J. Trump. So obviously this was a big Trumpyism post. Like I said, I really think that I don't know if this will necessarily hurt Trump much in the midterms. Like I said before, it could, it might not. We'll see. Actually, I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later. But it's pretty clear that this was premeditated, and he's kind of had enough of what Tucker, Megyn, and Candace have been saying about him, which, to be fair, I think that some of their criticism is unwarranted. Obviously, Trump has proven himself over these years, these past 2 terms, or his 2 terms, I'll say, on his positions, his policies. They've been generally successful. So I understand why he did it. Like I said, it's an inevitability because I've pulled up the study before. Conservatives have significantly higher diversity of thought than the left. So we have a lot more different opinions, different organizations or different coalitions that make up the MAGA movement. So it naturally makes sense that we would have infighting. And this is only being exacerbated by the fact that we are in power. The conservatives are in power now. And it's always more popular to be the resistance against whoever's in power. So obviously, I do believe that some of these people are going out and doing this they're grifters. They're just trying to make money by any means necessary. They see that Trump is in power, and it's a lot easier for them to make money by being anti-Trump, just like it was easier to make money when they were anti-Biden. So we'll see how this goes. Like I said, I personally don't think this was the best statement to do, but I understand why he did it. And while we're talking about podcasters, obviously there was news that the Supreme Court actually cleared the way for the dismissal of Steve Bannon's contempt of Congress charge, which is huge because he was told that he was in contempt of Congress because they asked him to show up at, I believe it was a January 6th hearing, and he had nothing to do with January 6th, so there was no reason for him to come. And then the Democrats decided to hold him in contempt of Congress and actually put him in jail for that, just like they did with Peter Navarro. So this is a long time coming, and hopefully it goes through because this was political lawfare. I mean, if you can just take somebody and for whatever reason, like they may not even be associated with a given investigation, and if you subpoena them and they choose not to come because it literally doesn't apply to them whatsoever, then you shouldn't be held in contempt of Congress for that. But that's what they did. So that's absolutely ridiculous. And another political figure another political pundit podcaster that made the news this week was Isabel Brown. And this was actually something that I think is huge, and I'm surprised that more people haven't been talking about it. So she put up a video. I'll play it now.
A wellness check on the teenagers in high school right now, because what is this? Someone sent their AP government textbook to Carol Markowitz, their cousin, to show them the political ideology grid that they are currently teaching in American high schools. Guys, I have so many questions. Apparently the only person in American politics who is economic right and more libertarian is Ron Paul, who is like barely libertarian. Hillary Clinton and George W. Bush are the same dot because they have the same exact political ideology. What? And they both are more authoritarian than Fidel Castro. Apparently Obama is a right-wing authoritarian in 2008. And he becomes more right-wing economically and more authoritarian by 2012, closely mirroring the political ideology of Maggie Thatcher. And of course, Ted Cruz, who is far more authoritarian, by the way, than Fidel Castro. And pretty much on the exact same line. It looks like he's more authoritarian than Joseph Stalin over there. Donald Trump is on par, of course, with Hitler. Bernie Sanders is barely economic left. Nelson Mandela is a libertarian. What? I don't even know what to do with this. The textbook in question, your college level American government course, your AP course offered to high schoolers in America today. And justice for George W. Bush having to share a dot with Hillary Clinton.
So as you can see in that video that she put up, she actually found this textbook that is one of the textbooks that for the AP US Government and Politics exam, which for those of you who don't know, AP stands for Advanced Preparation, and it allows high school students to get college credits while they're in high school. So this is a nationwide test or subject that they can take to get college credits. And it's extremely left-wing. And what's funny is, because I actually chose to go through the book to try to find this so I could share it with you guys myself, just to validate that these claims are true. And they are, in fact, true, this political ideology spectrum. I'm not going to put up the picture just because I don't want to get hit with a copyright strike or anything like that. Just like I won't be putting up any of these pictures. You can find them. I will give you the page numbers and the book title. So that spectrum that she cited in her video is on page 673 of the textbook. And the textbook is American Government Stories of a Nation. This was published in 2019. So it's fairly recent. It's not super outdated, but it's fairly recent, 7 years old. But let's look into some of the things that I was literally just skimming to try to find that graph. So first one on page 592, this was referring to equality of opportunity. This is a direct quote from the textbook. Affirmative action programs discussed in Chapter 9 are one attempt to level the playing field. Affirmative action is premised on the idea that American society and American government created an uneven playing field. Opponents of affirmative action programs argue that they hinder equality of opportunity by favoring some groups over others. Okay, that is literally what affirmative action does. Like, affirmative action means that you give certain advantages to certain groups of people because of their identities, whether that be their race, their sex. I don't even know what all the terms are now, because obviously the left keeps on making up terms for all that. But basically any identity that is considered to be not in power or to be an oppressed minority, they are given explicitly bonuses, essentially. And that hinders equality of opportunity, because if not everybody is given the same opportunity, because you're giving those opportunities to other people as an advantage, then yes, that is objectively true. Like, this is in a textbook for high schoolers. Next, page 595. This is about free enterprise. The vast majority of democracies provide national health care run by the government. Although the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, required Americans to purchase health care, it is not nationalized medicine because the doctors and hospitals are still private organizations. Many Americans oppose the Affordable Care Act because they believe that it brought more government regulation into the healthcare system, which it did. It objectively did. And like I said, this was from 2019. We had the numbers at this point that the Affordable Care Act was actually increasing premiums. So it's not crazy. And this policy is a failed policy. We can look back and say that all the numbers support that. And this is encouraging the youth of our nation, our future, our literal future, that this is actually a good thing, that we should be having nationalized healthcare. Which, I mean, you could just look at the UK with the long wait times over there, where you'll probably die before you actually get your health care, which is government sponsored, so it is free for you. Or if we could just look at Canada, where you, instead of actually offering you the health care, they try to get you to kill yourself. They're also doing this in Spain, as we talked about a few weeks ago while I was out in CPAC. So these policies don't work in practice. And even setting that aside, the only reason that these policies are even able to function the way that they do is because the U.S. largely provides the military force to defend these other countries, so they can spend more of their money on these programs, which, if you like them, then I guess I could see why you would want less U.S. military funding. But the problem is that these countries only have what they have because of us. And that's why. So that's another thing that is blatantly left-wing and saying that they're actually teaching this to kids. But we also had page 598, when AFDC, this is also known as Aid to Families with Dependent Children. This is an old entitlement policy that it was need-based assistance. And so when AFDC was ended, the claims about lifetime dependency were on weak ground. So I'm just going to stop reading the quote right there. So that implies that there was little to no evidence that people were depending on this for their lives. They were only on it for a very short period of time and then they got off it. Which, okay, let's see what they actually have the evidence of. Congressional reports showed that only 30%, only 30% of recipients received benefits for 8 years or more. For the overwhelming majority, welfare was a short-term bridge between jobs. Okay, so we go from there is extremely, this is weak ground. There's no way that there's lifetime dependency on the AFDC. But we have 30% of recipients that have been on it for 8+ years. Isn't that crazy? We have 30% of the population that that get this need-based assistance are on it for 8+ years. That disproves the point that there is a weak ground for it, for lifetime dependency. If it were like 5%, or maybe even under like 10%, I could see that. But 30%, that's almost a third of people on here are on here for a significant period of time. And while 70% are using it as a short-term bridge between jobs, which is great, that doesn't excuse the 30% that aren't. Like, this is just ridiculous on its face. But I have to say, these next 2 points, this is about globalization, I think are absolutely hilarious. So this is on page 614. Globalization may make it more difficult for authoritarian states to operate without consequences. So the whole idea here, because this is talking about globalization and democracy, how it talks about a bunch of watchdog organizations. I'm not going to read the whole thing because this one is a bit longer, but it's talking about Reporters Without Borders, Transparency International, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch. So there are a ton of different organizations that they're talking about here. And they're saying that it makes it more difficult for authoritarian states to operate without consequences. Okay. So that's fair if you want to consider individual countries. But what they don't actually talk about here is the fact that if you have a global order, that global order could be authoritarian. And then there's authoritarianism across the world, across the globe. Like, this is just common sense. You don't have to have a degree in political science or anything like that to recognize that this isn't true. I mean, it's just insane. But this right here, the hypocrisy here, talking about the economy, is absolutely hilarious to me. So this is on page 614. The effects of trade agreements are complicated, and politicians often simplify the discussion of globalization to advance their political agendas. In an article about the impact of NAFTA, market correspondent Sabri Ben Anker states, Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, who both use NAFTA as a favorite target during their presidential campaigns, will tell you it was a disaster for the U.S. economy, that it cost the United States hundreds of thousands of jobs. The reality is that is not nearly as dramatic or tidy a story. So for those of you who don't know what NAFTA is, it's the North American Federal Trade Agreement. So it basically opened up trade between North America between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And what this did is it led to us outsourcing a lot of our jobs, leading to, I believe that, I have the numbers right here actually. This is from the Economic Policy Institute, which it claims to be a nonpartisan organization. They're pretty clearly left-wing if you look into them. But we have losses of 700,000 jobs as these jobs are being moved to Mexico. So that's already insane on its face, like an insane claim. And like I said, this is a leftist book, essentially, with the way that they're interpreting everything. But even leftists disagree with them on this. But, so they say that on page 614. Literally the next page, they have this quote. While globalization can spread new ideas, increase innovation, and encourage democracy, it also has negative consequences. If an MNC doesn't want to abide by labor regulations or environmental standards of a country, it can move its production elsewhere. Outsourcing occurs when a company moves its business to a place where labor costs are cheaper or production is more efficient because workers work longer hours. Outsourcing by U.S. companies resulted in job loss for employees in several industries, but especially in information-based businesses like call centers and in manufacturing. From 2000 to 2016, the United States has lost 5 million manufacturing jobs. It is difficult for the workers left behind to find jobs that pay as well and offer as many benefits as their former positions. So on the page before, the NAFTA isn't actually a big thing. They're overblowing what the economic problems are of it. So NAFTA was signed in 1992. This is from 2000 to 2016, so 8 years later. I believe that it was in place until 2016 when Trump removed it. Oh yeah, well, we did lose 5 million manufacturing jobs, but it was overblown when they said it was hundreds of thousands of jobs. It's just insane. Like, these people are absolutely ridiculous. This book has absolutely no place in our educational institutions because they're literally spreading lies and not teaching students the critical thinking skills to actually see through these lies. So they blatantly believe them, and they very likely will be like the leftists who will challenge you on it and then don't understand the reasoning behind any of their arguments. So that's insane. But like I was talking about with people not knowing the arguments, we had a new study come out this week, and this is great. So I highly recommend that you guys actually look into this and share it with people that you feel need this. because there was a new study on quote unquote gender affirming care and how it actually doesn't work. This study went from 1996 to 2019. I have the abstract pulled up right now. So gender-referred adolescents showed significantly higher psychiatric morbidity than controls, both before, so 45.7% in the gender-referred group, as opposed to 15% in the non-gender-referred group, the control group, and greater than or equal to 2 years after referral, which was 61.7% in the gender-referred group, with 14.6% in the control group. So the control group relatively stayed the same. They had about 15% that had mental, psychiatric morbidity is the term that they're using here, mental health issues, essentially. But at the same time, those people with gender confusion, gender referred, later on it goes into gender dysphoria and how that's what they're actually referring to here. But those individuals, before they get treatment, they're at 45.7% mental health issues. And after treatment, they have 61% mental health issues. And that's way outside of the margin of error in this. It's just insane. And people actually believe that this is the case. And so those referred after 2010 had greater psychiatric needs than earlier cohorts. It still looks like it's fairly similar to the numbers from before. The baseline is 47.9 instead of 45.7, and it goes to 61.3 instead of 61.7. But the numbers show right here. And if you want to criticize me for looking into this the abstract of this, let's look at the actual conclusion. So this is the clinical implications of this study. And this is directly from the people who wrote this study. Regardless of gender, adolescents suffering from gender dysphoria present with excessive psychiatric morbidity subsequent to medical gender reassignment. Psychiatric treatment needs appear to increase. It should be noted that in some individuals, medical gender reassignment appears to be linked to deterioration in mental health. Possible mechanisms and vulnerable subgroups should be explored in future studies. The effects of medical gender reassignment and the expectations of the patient must be addressed before commencing the treatment. The considerable severe psychiatric morbidity prior to contacting the GIS, I don't know what that one stands for, and its increase over time suggests that some of these adolescents, gender dysphoria may be secondary to other mental health challenges. This underscores the need to thoroughly assess and appropriately treat mental disorders among those seeking gender reassignment before and after undergoing irreversible medical treatments. Psychiatric needs must be adequately met. Look, this is just common sense. This is what conservatives have been saying for years. It's just common sense. If you have people who have a bunch of mental health illnesses and then suddenly believe that they're the opposite sex, which in my mind is because they have some sort of identity issue that they want to be included, or they maybe some other issues. Obviously, identity is one of the primary ones, but they have some sort of issues where they want to be included in a group, and this seems to be the quickest and easiest way into a group. But they don't actually realize what they're getting into because nobody is allowed to criticize it, which is absolutely insane. You should be able to criticize anything like this that has life-changing impacts. But I'm glad that the study's out there. I hope that people share this because I've only seen very few people share this. This is like huge because it disproves the whole leftist thought process, which we've seen before, that quote-unquote gender-affirming care actually helps them, which clearly doesn't. Their mental health gets worse after receiving it. And like I've cited before, there are some studies that say that suicide rates increase by up to 12 times after getting these gender reaffirming, or gender reassignment surgery. So it's just insane that people still believe in this stuff. But we have the evidence that shows otherwise. And I mean, Democrats just don't learn. They just like living in their own bubble. And this is clearly evidenced by me. I hate to say I told you so, but I was completely right about the Democrats polling for this election. Nobody actually knows whether conservatives are going to lose this election. Republicans, I mean, because new polling shows that Democrats are actually not, they don't have the lead that they typically would have. And I'll play the clip right now.
Say this, Mr. Berman, and that is that this lead is historically low for Democrats at this point with a Republican president. Because take a look here. I'm taking a look at the average of all the polls. Dem generic congressional ballot lead at this point in the cycle with the Republican president. On average, their lead's actually slightly less. It's 5 points. That's less than it was back in 2018 when it was 8 points, and way less than it was during the 2006 cycle when it was 11 points. So yeah, Democrats are ahead, but they're only ahead by 5 with a president whose net approval rating is bordering on -20 to -30, depending on what polls you look at. You'd make the argument Democrats should be way ahead, and they're just only sort of slightly ahead.
Now, to be clear, 5 points might be enough for them to retake the House, which is really a narrow margin.
Yeah.
Would not take much at all for
Yeah,
Democrats
a
to get this.
Would blow it. And
The Senate is a different matter.
yeah, the Senate is a different matter. I think 5 points is enough to take back the House. But in the Senate, 5 points is almost certainly not enough if you apply it to the Senate map. Why do I say that? Because let's just take a look. GOP would win the Senate with this map. Let's say Republicans only hold on to the states that Trump won by greater than 10 points. That would, in fact, give them the Senate 51 to 49. Why? Because what you would see is you would see that the Democrats would flip North Carolina, they would flip Maine, but Republicans would hold on to Ohio, they'd hold on to Texas, and they'd hold on to Alaska because Donald Trump won all of those states by greater than 10 points. And I will note, John and I were talking, we have the NCAA tournament going on. This is sort of the chalk scenario going on where the most obvious events actually do occur. Because take a look, during the Trump era, look at this, flip the Senate seat, midterm and presidential years. States the other party won by 10 plus points in the last presidential election. 0 times did a party flip those states. So we're talking about places like Texas, Alaska, Ohio, where Trump won by double digits.
Which is why the Democrats might need a bigger lead than they have now if the Senate is really in play. What else is going on now for the Democrats that maybe should cause them concern?
What might cause them concern? Why is that generic congressional ballot lead so low? Because just take a look at this. Net favorability, party ahead at this point, midterm years with the GOP president. In 2018, Dems were up by 12. In 2006 on net favorability, which party you like more? Dems were ahead by 18. Republicans are actually ahead on net favorability at this point by 5 points. So Democrats are just simply put running behind their previous benchmarks, and they need to be running well ahead of them if they want to take back the United States Senate, given that map.
To be clear, both parties are wildly unfavorable
Correct.
right now. However,
Democrats are even more unpopular than Republicans.
Some of these charts are something Democrats should look at as they head into November. Harriet, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Berman.
Yeah, so you can see Democrats are actually floundering. They're extremely unpopular. The GOP is more popular than the Democrats are. And even though the Democrats do still have a projected lead in the midterms this year, nobody can tell you that they're going to win because they're just so unpopular amongst Americans. It's just insane. Like, and people, I got screamed at by leftists about how I'm so biased and I'm so partisan. Look, if you guys win, good for you. I'm obviously against that. It's going to be problems for me. It's going to be bad policies. But I would much rather you be informed and realize that you may lose this election, because then we don't have any problems like we've had before where, I mean, just in 2024, the leftists were absolutely shocked that Trump won when anybody who was paying attention knew that Trump was way ahead. And there was almost no way that Kamala was going to win. But if they want to live in a land of delusion, let them. But unfortunately, that delusion seems to be coming to the Republican Party as well. This is in the form of the so-called Dignidad Act, because obviously this is not for Americans. This is to help illegals. This is a bipartisan bill that is literally named in Spanish, the Dignidad Act, which grants amnesty to illegals. And so this was actually proposed by a Republican congresswoman in 2025, which I am extremely aggravated that this is just making the news now, because this is something that we should have heard about more when it was first revealed, so we could have shut it down. Because I don't recall the Republican representative's name that issued this, but she seems to be a more moderate Republican, which I'm against that. It's better than Democrats in most instances, but not in all instances. And in this instance, this is basically a Democrat policy. And she actually came out and said that this bill didn't offer amnesty, which actually isn't true. So if you look at Division B, Title 1, this is the quote-unquote Dream Act of the Dignidad Act. In Section 2102A, this is the exact quote. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, and except as provided in Section 2104C, Section 2, an alien shall be considered at the time of obtaining the status of an alien lawfully admitted for permanent residence under this section to have obtained such status on a conditional basis subject to the provisions of this title. So if you meet the requirements of this bill, you are granted full legal citizenship, which is a problem. We actually have too many legal immigrants into this country too, with the H-1B visas. Like that's a whole other topic, which I'll give my take on it right now. I'll go more in depth probably in some future video, but the H-1B visas, these are people who are literally coming here, taking American jobs and working for lower wages and more hours. So I'm extremely against that. I think the Trump administration isn't doing the right thing by supporting them. But like I said, I'll get more into that in some future video, hopefully. But the requirements specified to grant this amnesty for people are that they, one, must be continuously present, physically present in the U.S. since January 1st, 2021. They must be 18 years or younger when they enter the country illegally, as long as they are not inadmissible under 8 U.S. Code 1182A. They have not participated in persecution on basis of race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion. So it's kind of a nothing charge there, but I mean, it's good that they're having more strict requirements. They must not be barred from adjustment of immigration status, which is based on other existing laws. They must have been admitted to an institution of higher education, been admitted to a career and technical education school at the post-secondary level, obtained the equivalent of a high school diploma, or are enrolled in an educational program that would give them a pathway to receiving the equivalent of a high school diploma, whether that be a state issue, GED, or whatever. So these aren't insane requirements to actually implement this. This essentially covers the whole Biden era when we had record numbers of illegals entering the country. So, and then the other problem with this too is that because most of these are or were minors, and there's a good chance that they're going to be anchor babies that are included in this, their parents are going to stay because they have kids here that are minors, and that's the problem with this. It doesn't just impact these individuals. It's their whole families that are now essentially given a free pass to stay in the country when they shouldn't be here. And I should know, I come from a family of immigrants. My family came here the right way. And that's why I'm so upset with these people who just think that they can skip the line and get away with it. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But while we're attempting to appease leftists, the left is still targeting us and spreading lies about it. So we have this from Zeteo. I think that's how this is pronounced. ZTO. I don't know. However you want to pronounce it. This is Trump's new Red Scare is coming to state and local police near you. Internal emails show the FBI instructing state and local police on how to enforce the president's crackdown on left-wing dissent. Okay. So if you actually read this, they don't actually show the emails anywhere. They don't give you the emails that supposedly show that this is happening. So there's no actual evidence of this, but their claims rely on, what is it? It's the NSPM 7, which is an executive order signed by President Trump regarding political violence. So I have it up on the screen now, so you can actually see what was signed. And I think this is where the author is referencing. I genuinely have no idea, because this is the only mention of social media. Because in the article that he wrote, he's talking about how this is going to be a crackdown on social media. So if you put any criticism of Trump or the Trump administration, you're going to go to jail. And that's just not true. In the first place, it's absurd on its face. But if you read the executive order that he's talking about, literally the only mention of social media is these campaigns often begin by isolating and dehumanizing specific targets to justify murder or other violent action against them. They do so through a variety of fora, including anonymous chat forums, in-person meetings, social media, and even educational institutions. So I'm assuming that right there is what he's referring to. But as I just read, they're not actually targeting people for their speech. And you can see this. They're merely stating how they begin. They don't say anything about enforcing it. So if you want to say that not saying anything about enforcing it is them going to enforce it, which, like I said, lack of evidence does not mean that something is happening. You don't have evidence. You can't prove anything without evidence. So that is just absurd. But I also saw this while I was doing some research on that to try to figure out what exactly they were talking about with these emails, to see if I could find the email somewhere to actually say, oh, wow, these guys are actually right about this. This is bad and we should condemn it. But I couldn't. So what I also found was this from National Today. White House budget reveals Trump admin's push to label political opposition terrorism. Okay, so this is referring to a new budget proposal for 2027 that was released by the FBI. It was unclassified recently. I believe it was drafted in March and it was just recently unclassified. And so you can see here, this is the section that they're talking about, domestic terrorism. Again, this doesn't really reference social media. It just says domestic terrorists exploit a variety of popular social media platforms, smaller websites, with targeted audiences and encrypted chat applications. They use these platforms to recruit new adherents, plan and rally support for in-person actions, and disseminate materials encouraging radicalization and mobilization to violence. Okay, so again, nothing saying anything about targeting people for social media posts or anything like that. Lack of evidence doesn't mean that something is happening. All this is just hearsay. Now, I think the next paragraph is where they get their claim from. Where they say domestic terrorist lone offenders will continue to pose significant detection and disruption challenges because of their capacity for independent radicalization to violence, ability to mobilize discreetly, and access to firearms. Additionally, in recent years, heinous assassinations and other acts of political violence in the United States have dramatically increased. Commonly, this violent conduct relates to views associated with anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, and anti-Christianity, support for the overthrow of the U.S. government, extremism on migration, race, and gender, and hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family, religion, and morality. So that, I believe, is where they're coming from, maybe? I mean, it still says nothing about them targeting these people or labeling them domestic terrorists. It just says that these are common patterns that we're seeing in modern domestic terrorism, which is actually true. As I've gone over it, I think it was my second video I went in. It was either the first or second video where we have the numbers. Leftists are radical. They say that they support political violence, especially the young ones. They support political violence, or it can be supported. And at the same time, we even have left-wing sources. I believe it was either The Atlantic or CNN that put out an article saying that the left has a violence problem. So this is not crazy. This is just saying that this is what's happening. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only domestic terrorism that's happening. And that doesn't mean that this is the only domestic terrorism they're focusing on. They're focusing on all domestic terrorism. So it's just, these posts are just insane that they actually go and say some of this stuff. But we had that. And while the FBI is going after domestic terrorism and the federal government is actually doing a good job at upholding our laws, we're seeing some states fall behind in that regard, where it was revealed this week that the alleged killer of Iryna Zarutska will not be facing state charges because he was deemed incompetent, which is insane. If you follow me on, I think I put it up on X and Instagram, I don't recall. This is yet another reason why we need to eliminate the insanity and incompetence pleas. It's ridiculous that you can have somebody break our laws and then they don't get punished for it because they don't know any better. How insane is that? The whole concept of our judicial system is to protect the innocent from the criminals, the guilty. Yet we allow some of those criminals to get off scot-free because they're insane. They don't understand what they're doing. They can't possibly realize that what they're doing is wrong. That literally deprives the innocent of justice, which goes back to my whole point of the show, where Christ tells us that we should be supporting the justice for all individuals, and particularly the innocent. And yet these people aren't doing it. I mean, from what I've seen, it does seem like the competency hearing has been postponed by 180 days. It's been delayed by his attorney, but his evaluation occurred on December 29th, and the state already said that they're going to drop charges. Like, that's insane. Luckily, there's still federal charges. And I believe in this article, they do go on a little bit later and specify that there's going to be a hearing on whether or not he's competent to face the death penalty for his crime, which is absurd. That's a thing. I don't understand how you not understanding that something that literally murdering somebody is wrong gives you an excuse to not face the death penalty. I genuinely don't understand the logic there, but if somebody can explain that to me, please put it in the description. I'll try to read through the comments and understand that. But that's just insane. And so while the federal government is still pursuing actual justice in that instance, and the state government is ignoring it, again, this is pretty much happening with fraud, as we've been seeing Nick Shirley expose fraud across the country, especially in Minnesota and California recently. J.D. Vance was recently appointed to be Fraud Czar, I believe is the title that they gave him. And so this week he actually just uncovered a potential $6 billion in fraudulent government contracts that were given out during the Biden administration. So I have the news article pulled up right here. This is exclusive to the Daily Caller. They were the ones who broke this story, where they began to send out letters to nearly 400 businesses with government contracts that they believe could be fraudulent. So of these, there were 895 contracts given to the 392 businesses for a total of $6.3 billion in fraud, with $3 billion still left to be rewarded. So at least not all of the money was awarded. I mean, that's good, I guess, but a potential $6 billion in fraud. And the craziest part is that these organizations were not checked to see if they were real or lawful. They were literally, the government saw the name and they said, oh yeah, you know what, we're just going to give you money. We're just going to give you the money. How insane is that? These are your tax dollars. They're sending your tax dollars to somebody who won't even prove that they have a business. This is just absolutely absurd. So luckily, the way that these businesses get found out is they have 30 days to prove that they're actually they have a physical address and they're a legitimate business, which it's insane that this didn't happen prior to the money being sent to them, but at least it's happening, and hopefully we can get some of the money back. I highly doubt that, but I mean, this is what's been happening across the country, and nobody's really been held accountable. So at least people are being held accountable. But what I do have to say is, because this is the end of the episode, and if you don't want to be a fraud like these fraudsters are, you got to subscribe to my podcast. Obviously, I'm here every week. If you like what I do here, please like the video, share it around. Like I said before, I do this for free. I don't make money off of this. I do this because I want you guys to be informed and have an understanding of what's going on. Whether you're a conservative or not, you should understand the world going around with you. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next week on the Ben Corriveau Show.